Let's talk some Minnesota portal. So last year, the portal was rather good to Minnesota. The Jamison battle loss looked like one that was really, really difficult for them, but they were able to bring in Mike Mitchell and Elijah Hopkins, who wasn't even rated in the portal on 24/7. He turns into one of their best players this season. Ben Johnson obviously knew what he was doing. Mike Mitchell coming over from Pepperdine. And where did Hawkins come from, Mike? Was it Buffalo or something?
Oh,
Or was it Buffalo in the MAC?
I think I'm forgetting offhand.
Might be. It looks like a Buffalo logo.
Yeah.
from the NFL.
I was just happy we had a plus athlete at point guard for the first time since Nate Mason. I wasn't even worried about where he came from. I was just like, this guy fell out of the sky and he can move and actually match up athletically. Thank the Lord.
Oh yeah, he was one of my favorite players to watch all season. Just how quick he was and getting around the court and all that stuff. So anyway, yes, Minnesota now has lost a few players in the portal, and there was rumorings about other players, but they have not lost two of their best players so far in Cam Christie and Dawson Garcia. They have lost Braden Carrington, Josh Olu-Joseph, and Farrell Payne. So those are obviously players that would have probably have made an impact next season that the Gophers would have liked to hold on to. But if you ask me, if Minnesota is able to get through this portal process and they're able to keep Dawson Garcia and they're able to keep Cam Christie from the NBA, sign me up. That would be fantastic for them. Mike, what are your thoughts for Minnesota in the portal so far? Their three players that they've kept are Mike Mitchell, Dawson Garcia, and Cam Christie. What do you think the future is for them if they're going to continue to stick around, and just your overall thoughts in that area?
Well, let's go back to Joshua Olu-Joseph had really fallen out of the rotation. So Hawkins came from Howard. That's right. Good call. Thank you for that too. Joshua Olu-Joseph had really fallen out of the rotation, and Isaiah Innan as well. Innan never really came back well from injury, and Joshua Olu-Joseph just honestly defensively did not have the kind of IQ you need to play in the Big Ten. He was just missing rotations left and right and not staying on his guy, and just he made himself kind of unplayable that way. But the rumor is, at least coming out of the latest rumors are that Braden Carrington wants back in.
All right.
So he's allegedly gone to Ben Johnson, asked to get back in, and it's unclear whether Ben Johnson is willing to take him back or not yet. The Gophers are also looking at Cornell's Isaiah Gray, who's being recruited as a perimeter defensive stopper coming off the bench, potentially to do the Braden Carrington kind of role. So it would be interesting to see. I don't know if they would want both of those guys or not. Both those guys are plus defensive players and kind of not great shooters who can do some things offensively, but aren't, very efficient on that side of the court. So that'll be interesting to see. As far as replacing Farrell Payne, NDSU center Andrew Morgan committed to the Gophers, and that's the good news, right?
All right.
So he committed, and they're like, hey, we've got our center. It's all set up. Good to go for next year. Somebody taking Farrell Payne's place. Well, the latest word is that Mr. Morgan has been talked into taking a trip to Lincoln.
Uh-oh.
And And Nebraska has more NIL money in basketball than we do. They just do. So if they want him, that could be real trouble. And then Ben could be starting back from square one, looking for a center for next year. And basically, Elijah Hawkins said initially that he was coming back. So that's the good news. And there's nothing to say for sure he's not coming back. But as for Dawson Garcia and Cam Christie, I'm worried.
Yep.
And the rumors, if you listen to them, are that they're getting offered more than Minnesota can offer. Now, of course, you always wonder, are those rumors real? Would they actually get the money? But it doesn't matter if the recruits actually get the money or not. Or the players actually get the money or not. What matters is if they believe it's coming to them or not. Right. So with Dawson Garcia and Cam Christie, it's possible both of those guys are walking out the door. It's possible both those guys are coming back. I think, though, the rumors are we're going to know soon. So I don't know what you do if both those guys walk out the door. I think you're in a really tough spot fielding a competitive team for next year.
Philip has a good question here. Does Minnesota have much of NIL? I know Minnesota's NIL for football is pretty good. Dinkytown, I know they're working on that. In fact, they're working on that for the spring game. I think members only are allowed to the spring game this year. So
there's no spring game actually, but they're members. They had a members only practice that I attended.
Oh, okay.
That's as a member of Dinkytown Athletes, yeah.
Yeah. Do you know the status of Minnesota's NIL for basketball? If it's very much at all, can they afford to maybe even keep just Cam Christie or just Dawson Garcia? What are your thoughts there?
I mean, that's the question is, can they keep or would they keep based on how much those guys need, right? How much those guys are asking for? Because the number that Pharrell Payne was reportedly asking for, I thought was crazy, but maybe he's actually going to get it. So the market might be crazier than I thought as far as that goes. Minnesota. So in the late 90s, Minnesota had an academic scandal and they got 5 years of sanctions from the NCAA. And the basketball program has never fully recovered from that. And on top of that, I would say Minnesota historically has always been much more of a football school than a basketball school. That's just the way it has been over the long history of the school. So I guess that's a roundabout way of saying that NIL wise, there is money. I don't want to say there's not money. There is money. And I know that there are, guys making six figures or whatever, but what Dawson and Cam might be worth might be way more than I even thought was possible. So they do have some NIL, but they're much more competitive in football than they are in basketball for NIL. Like in football, we were able to keep our whole team. And the last time we lost a player was Bucky Irving, and that was before our collective had started. So now that we have our collective up and running, we've been able to keep our players in football, and in basketball, it's been a lot tougher. And I also think in basketball, culturally, there are more guys in the portal than in football, just in general. So I think it makes it harder, not just for Minnesota, but I think it makes it harder for schools everywhere. A lot of schools everywhere in basketball that aren't traditionally basketball schools, maybe.
Yeah. Dave has a good point here. He says Minnesota has more NIL money going to hockey than basketball, which makes sense for Minnesota.
I don't know if that does make sense because basketball is a much bigger revenue sport than hockey is. I think it makes sense to invest in hockey. Please, hockey people, don't come for me. I think it makes sense to invest in hockey. I do, and I'm glad we have a great hockey program. Don't get me wrong, pride on ice forever, always, for sure. But I do think that it would make sense from a financial investment standpoint. Obviously, football is the best investment. That has the biggest return on investment money-wise. But basketball is definitely second as far as a ceiling for what you can earn as a program. Hockey just doesn't have a great TV contract because it's more of a niche sport in most of the country.
Yeah.
So it's I always say it's great that Minnesota has a great hockey program, but I kind of group hockey. Hockey is a revenue sport in Minnesota, but it's in a different category than football and basketball. I think if you're trying to compare them, it's kind of apples to oranges.
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense for Minnesota fans that, they're probably more invested overall. Wouldn't you say that they're probably more invested in hockey than they are basketball? Is that correct?
That's a great question. I mean, there's a lot of, I mean, if they're winning in NIL, then they probably are more invested. Yeah, that's probably true.
Yeah. And so I totally get what you're saying. And I think that is a valid point that you want to put the money where where you're going to make money at. But at the end of the day, I get where Dave is coming from too, that it's fans might care more about hockey than they do basketball, which in my mind is a little unfortunate because you had a really good team this year. And if you bring back those guys, you could be even better next year. But, it's kind of all about just how the school is set up and, what they really value at the end of the day.
Yeah, and like I said, I just don't think the basketball fan base also is older than the football fan base. Like you can see it clearly. When you go to games, it is visibly older. And I think that there's not as many people of that generation who are invested in NIL.
Yeah,
that
makes sense.
So I think but Minnesota's just for whatever reason, Minnesota's always just had more success in football than in hoops.
Yeah. That makes sense. Casual Big Ten. Also, if I don't get a Parker Fox update, why am I even here? Kent resident Parker Fox. I almost said, and Parker Fox enjoyer on this podcast when he's here with us on Sunday nights. Mike, do you know anything about Parker Fox? Is he coming back? What are the thoughts there?
The rumors are that the rumors are positive.
Okay.
The rumors are very positive about Parker coming back. It's not a sure thing. I know he said some things after the season about it was a lot to get his knees through everything. But he also, that guy bleeds maroon and gold. You talk about in this day and age when most guys are about the money, Parker Fox bleeds maroon and gold, and he's all about the Gophers. So I am cautiously optimistic we're going to have Parker Fox back for one more year. And I just hope that the Gophers can put a good team around him. And, we're in uncharted territory, guys. I'm actually curious from your perspective, if Dawson Garcia and Cam Christie, if they walk, let's say they do, do you even have that would free up a lot of NIL money, would be the good thing. And the question is, who's available at this point in the calendar who wants the shot to play at a Big Ten school?
What do you think, Evan? If they lose Cam Christie and Dawson Garcia, is Minnesota going to be able to field a had this year where it's kind of middle of the pack Big Ten team, almost a bubble NCAA tournament team?
I think it'd be pretty tough. Really, there's going to be plenty of guys available, that's for sure. So, it's so hard to tell. You still guys, still going to the portal. And once, NBA decisions that, you're still seeing guys go in May and all that kind of stuff. So, there's obviously going to be plenty of guys, but that's a lot of talent, a lot of production that you would lose. I love Cam Christie. I really wanted his brother at Purdue when he was coming out of high school. Izzo snatched him up, but they're awesome. I had heard or just read some rumors towards the end of the season that Garcia was like a surefire, he's leaving just to chase the bag, along with AJ Storr from Wisconsin. There was the two names that were they're definitely leaving their schools to go chase the highest bidder. But so the fact that he hasn't come out yet, I feel like it's got to be somewhat encouraging, but it could happen any moment. But yeah, it sucks. I like Ben Johnson a lot. He's a really good coach, and it just sucks this day and age that it's just so hard to, for the coaches just to even just keep anybody at this point. It's just a bummer, but.
What I always say at We Live for Saturday is that until we get a collective bargaining agreement and we're actually paying the players directly from the TV revenue and from the massive revenue pot that everybody's got, until we have that in multi-year contracts and buyouts, we're not going to have any stability in college sports. And college basketball is even more unstable than college football, significantly more unstable.
Right. Well, and the star factor, obviously in football, there's a star factor for quarterbacks, and so that's a big thing. But you can have a star at any position on the floor in basketball, which really impacts it a whole lot more. I think that, Ben Johnson has a very interesting job at Minnesota. I think that his job is a lot more of identifying talent from schools that are under you, similar to Howard with bringing in Elijah Hawkins. And it's one of those things where he's going to have to do bringing in Mike Mitchell from Pepperdine. It's one of those things where, unfortunately, he's probably not going to be able to keep guys like Dawson Garcia and Cam Christie. It's just unfortunate. I don't like it because I think that those guys would be fantastic for Minnesota, and I think that they would be a much better team next year. But if he can bring in guys like the North Dakota State transfer, keep him from Lincoln, maybe they don't offer him as much because they have to pay some other guys. If he's able to keep him coming to Minnesota, and maybe some other players from smaller schools that do well, and maybe they're just looking for a chance, they're kind of up there in the north and they're not getting as much love as some of the players, out in California or maybe down south. If he can do that stuff like that, that's going to be the most important thing for him, because I really feel like that's the brand of Minnesota basketball right now. Bringing in some guys who did a good job at the lower level and see if Ben Johnson can put them in a system that's going to really excel their abilities and what they can do. I wouldn't say there's no hope for Minnesota if they lose Dawson Garcia and Cam Christie. Obviously, those are two players you really want to keep, but you look at Elijah Hawkins this year. Elijah Hawkins was a really good player. He came in, he had, very little hype coming in. Minnesota fans knew him, but he was not a very hyped up transfer. And Mike Mitchell as well. I think he had a little bit more hype to him, but still, he was a player that came in and did a very good job in the Big Ten. And so I think if they can find one guy to come in and kind of replace Cam Christie as maybe that star offensive player, that'll be good for them. But ultimately, it's going to be a task for Ben Johnson. It's not an easy job for him.
But I know that they're talking to the donors and pushing as hard as they can. So maybe in the 11th hour, somebody pulls a rabbit out of a hat, and those one or both of those guys stay. So it's still just rumors. I want to be clear. It's not. There's nothing official yet.
For sure. Yeah. My other question for you, Mike, and then we'll move on after this, is you guys have a top 100 point guard coming in, according to 24/7. I think he's from Mount Iron, Minnesota, or something like that. So, kid from the state, that's really cool. What other kind of, is this a piece? You kind of mentioned some other players that would come in, but is this a piece that you think he's going to come in and play right away? I can't remember his name off the top of my head. You might have it, but is this a kid that's going to come in play?
Isaac Asuma, from Iron, Minnesota.
Yeah, you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's expected to be the backup point guard right away.
Gotcha.
And I think the hope is that what happened with Minnesota a lot of times against some of the teams like Illinois, it was most pronounced, was they got Elijah Hawkins would get pushed around by bigger guards into the post, and he couldn't really hold up defensively there. So I think the hope is that Suma could come in right away, be a guy who can come off the bench, and maybe even be a guy that when the matchups aren't favorable and they're trying to push Elijah Hawkins around, he can play more minutes as he's got a lot better size than Hawkins does.
Yeah, that would be really good for them. And hopefully they keep him around and he's there for at least his sophomore season and does really well. Hometown kid, so much better chance of that happening for him. So